Here to discuss all this, Raul Reyes, a contributor with USA Today, Matt Lewis, contributing editor at The Week, Emily Tish Sussman, campaign director at the Center for American Progress, and Richard Socarides, an LGBT activist who was a senior advisor to President Bill Clinton, now a writer with The New Yorker. Thank you all for being here. Richard, I'm going to start with you. The news of Jeb Bush on Thursday supporting religious freedom measures that would allow discrimination against the LGBT community. What do you make of that?
Well, it's part of this backlash that we're starting to see against the success of marriage equality. The Supreme Court, people anticipate the Supreme Court ruling later this year, probably in the spring, that there should be a nationwide right to marriage equality. So no matter where you live, if you'll be able to marry the person you love. And in some states, in the more conservative states, we're seeing a backlash, and that backlash has taken the form of these bills, which basically say that if you have a an objection based upon religion, that you don't have to abide by the law. And it doesn't just apply to gay people. It could apply to all kinds of situations where, different states have drawn them differently. But the thing to remember is that we have a long history in this country of accommodating, religious freedom, which is an important American value, but also standing for equality. And these new bills, I think, are a bunch of nonsense. I think most of them are unconstitutional anyway. But for a while now, the Republican Party, in the middle of this primary season, are going to focus on this as a way to say, we're not for gay rights.
You've thrown a lot out there, and we have a map, I believe, of all the states where these religious freedom bills are coming up. Matt Roll, and there's the map there. I mean, Richard put threw a lot out there, so Matt, I want to have you respond to some of this.
Well, I think Richard's right about the potential for a backlash. I think that the American public in recent years has really become very sort of pro-gay marriage, and I think that because they were being, in a sense, victimized, but I think there's a chance that it's going to go the other way. At some point during the last few years, leave me alone became bake me a cake, and I think there is a danger that at some point you could see that pastors would be compelled to even perform gay marriages if they want to maintain their tax status. I think that's a bridge too far. I think that there really needs to be a reasonable accommodation where people who have deeply held religious values are not forced or compelled by the government to do things that violate their rights of conscience.
But the way the Supreme Court has interpreted these laws, first of all, these cases we've already seen among the states where people refuse to bake cakes or provide services to same-sex couples, those have all been struck down by the lower courts, and for good reason. The Supreme Court has basically held most recently in 1982 that if you're a commercial establishment, once you open your doors in the public arena, you open your doors to all. And you can see some of the reasoning behind that in a very prosaic type of way. If you're a business, if you're running a company, you interact with the court system, with the tax system, police, the infrastructure. Those are things that we all as taxpayers fund. So therefore, it's unconstitutional for these businesses to turn around and say to certain people, well, we're not going to provide these services to you. That makes them second class. And the important thing to remember is that the Supreme Court has a long history of when they look at laws banning banning discrimination based on sexual orientation, it does not outlaw the religious beliefs. The religious beliefs are irrelevant. It outlaws certain conduct that may arise from religious beliefs, and there's a difference.
Yeah. Look, this is the long game, right? Like, this is the long game in pushing LGBT rights and even those who are pushing against LGBT rights. Over the last couple of years, we've talked about marriage as being right in the center of the discussion, but we need to look a little bit past that. The court probably will rule on marriage nationwide in June. And so we need to be looking at what the next thing is for all those who care about LGBT rights. I think there is still a little bit of a lack of understanding that in many states around the country, you can still be fired, you can be kicked out of housing. That is the long game, and that religious freedom really is at the center of where the opposition will be. These bills will only come up more and more.
Can I say one thing about context, too? I mean, because Matt raises an interesting point about deeply held religious beliefs, but this whole argument turns on the context, right? If you're performing a religious service, for a long time in the United States, we don't force religion to abide by any one particular thing. So, so if you're in a denomination, if you're a pastor in a denomination that doesn't doesn't believe in gay marriage. No one is suggesting that you ever be forced to perform a gay marriage. But if you're engaged in the regular stream, as Raul says, if you're engaged in the regular stream of business or commerce, you have to abide by the rules that everybody abides by. Otherwise, no one will have to abide by any rules.
But I think there is a sense that this is...
Let's also just say here, in terms of the politics of this, what is happening is that Jeb Bush is trying to, has to win some primaries in order to get the Republican nomination. And the only way he can do that is he can't be for marriage equality. Now, he's trying to thread a very thin line here. Yeah. And that was really more of a non-answer than an answer that he gave.
But see, you're getting to something that I was just about to bring up, because in that SOT that we just played of Governor Bush saying that he doesn't think people act on their conscience shouldn't be discriminated against, for sure. There should be protections. And so as it relates to marriage equality, and that may change, the Supreme Court may change that automatically then shifts the focus to people of conscience. This idea that you can be for marriage equality, but you can also be for people being discriminated against because they're gay or lesbian, because of someone's religious beliefs. I'm having a hard time.
I think it speaks to a little of his rustiness as a candidate, because he's trying to thread the needle, fudge it, and I think, if you're going to take a side on one of these positions, you just have to own it. And I know this was an on-the-fly type of answer, but I think he's sort of trying to have it both ways. And I always tell people a good way to look at it is to flip it. What if you were, for example, in Utah, and you encountered a Mormon or certain establishments that would not deal with you because you did not were not a member of the LDS faith? Most people would be offended. Most Americans would be deeply offended by that.
I think Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio are actually now occupying the mainstream American position. I think for a long time, gay Americans, there was a sense that they were not having, equal rights. They couldn't get married, and I think that they had a lot of. I think they had a lot of. I think they. Let me finish. I think they had a lot of sympathy, and I think there's a chance that they could. That this could be. That there could be some backlash. And look, by the way, I do think there's going to come a time when Christian pastors and other religious leaders are compelled to perform gay marriages, because if I'm a gay person who who attends church, why shouldn't I have my pastor? I mean,
because
we need to reach an accommodation. There needs to be a compromise on this. These two issues are.
You are raising really a false issue here.
I don't think
this debate has never been about forcing religious denominations to perform any kind of marriages. I mean, this has always been about civil marriage. No, never in the history of the country. Never in the history of the country has a religious. I mean, we have freedom of religion in this country, and never in the history of the country have we forced a religion to do any one particular thing.
Why are we forcing photographers who have deeply held convictions to go photograph gay ceremonies?
Because photographers are in the normal stream of commerce. You wouldn't let a photographer not take a picture of an African American person because they didn't like African Americans.
If they didn't like conservatives and they didn't want to come to my wedding, I would hire somebody else.
Matt, there are civil rights laws that we all have to abide by, right?
And speaking of, these are the same arguments we heard during the post-civil rights period.
Here we go. Because this is exactly like Jim Crow. This is a perfect analogy.
No. It's not a perfect analogy, but I have to tell you that I get a little uncomfortable when people start using religious beliefs to hide behind or to use it as an excuse to not grant someone or allow someone their full dignity, the full respect that they deserve under our Constitution. People use religion.
And you know what? It was also religious people who were abolitionists. It was also religious people like William Wilberforce who fought against the slavery.
Well, I mean, and you're exactly right. They used religion to say, hey, look, you are not treating people fairly. Right. But what we're talking about are people who are potentially using religion to treat people unfairly.
There has to be a reasonable compromise here. We have to have some agreement whereupon everybody, where religious people who have deeply held religious convictions.
How do they prove that? Could someone please tell me
I think that's a great question. And I'd actually add a little bit of a twist to what Matt is. I actually don't disagree that this is entirely out of the mainstream of Americans, but I think it's because of a lack of education. I think that people feel like they should be a compromise position, and when you go to that extreme of a pastor or something that is religious in nature, but I think there is a widespread lack of understanding as to how far these religious freedom bills go.
And that exception exists in law today, right? I mean, it is a matter of settled law today in this country that if you are, in a religious denomination Republican that doesn't want to perform certain kind of marriages, you don't have to. This has always been about civil marriages, but really, this is a smokescreen that the Republicans are trying to set up right now, because it's an issue. It's like really a side issue. And I think Jeb Bush, I think it was inarticulate, but I think he gave exactly the answer he wanted to give. He wants to leave himself some breathing room on both sides so that if he can get the Republican nomination, if he can get through the primary process in the general election, he can soften his position. And I think no one should miss that point.
Look,
I think it's a mainstream position.
Look, the best thing that can happen for Republicans is a widespread, very broad ruling from the court on marriage so that it takes the issue off the table as much as possible.
I think
he is looking for a way to have it both ways in this position.
No, I think most Americans do not want gays to be discriminated against, and they do not want Christians to be compelled to violate their rights of conscience, especially, I think, when it comes to...
Well, that is exactly fine.
But how far does that go?
Is exactly fine.
What if it's a Catholic-operated hospital? Do they have the right to deny hospital services to the patients that come in on an emergency
basis? Well, what if people say that their religious beliefs prevent them from approving of some, say, like interracial couples or doing business with people from another denomination?
And now we're getting way off topic, and we're out of time. Many thanks to Richard Socarides of The New Yorker. Thanks very much. Still ahead.